Okay, welcome to the show where we talk service, sacrifice, and stories, connecting you with the past and the most interesting people in the field of commemorations and veterans causes. My name is Ryan Mullins. I'm here today with co-host Matthew. We're with Memory Anchor, a company dedicated to changing the way the world remembers. And our guest today is Nick Miller with Amazon Web Services and the former CIO of Arlington Cemetery, which is really exciting. Nick's had just such an amazing history and experience in the field of commemoration, and we're just really happy to have you on the show here today, Nick.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really excited.
Yeah, Nick, it's great to see you again. And yeah, just to kick things off, set the stage for listeners. We'd just love to learn just a little bit more about you and kind of what's inspired you to keep going in this space for so many years. You're a pioneer in so many ways.
Wow. Well, thanks. Look, I actually went kicking and screaming a little bit into the military, tried to rebel, and like many folks, parents often know better, right? And so, but that kind of kicked my career in the military, and I always thought I'd do 2 to 3 years and kind of, join the ranks of veterans. And I did 10 years in the military, deploying in the post 9/11 era to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And there you kind of see the human cost of sacrifice and kind of how much our veterans and our service members put in. And you kind of recognize how important it is on the backside to kind of commemorate and take care of them. Right before I got out of the military, I had an opportunity to go and stand up the Chief Information Officer's office at Arlington Cemetery. And there I was still in the Army, and we helped modernize the cemetery and kind of launch some flagship mobile applications for the cemetery. And in that time, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we improve the commemorative experience, the customer experience, the visitor experience, and how do we use technology to reach, teach, and as the cemetery would say, honor, remember, and explore. From there, I focused my career on how to apply commercial technologies, very innovative technologies, to the mission of government and the mission of national security. And one of those humbling missions is taking care of our veterans and kind of commemorating them after they've gone. And so, what keeps me going is, some of those stories where you remember very vividly and very poignantly the pain you felt or the pain you've seen your peers feel when they've lost. And you also see how technology can help family members very vividly when you can meet their needs in a time of need. And so something I'll always take with me. And, that's a little bit about my background. And I continue to focus on that mission today, how to use technology to enhance our government services, enhance the visitor experience, and enhance the commemorative experience.
Yeah, well, and you covered a lot there, Nick, in terms of just how your own experience has sent you into that place of commemoration, and then the work to really just witness and acknowledge veterans and what they've experienced. And the work you've done, and just I have to say, is like you were very much a pioneer in the field of using technology, and how you did that at Arlington. And it's been something that Matt and I have seen, and we're kind of blown away, because it was like 10 years ago you released the technology to really help that commemoration there, and that was well ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Today I focus on emerging technology and kind of the ramp of technology and how do you introduce that technology. I think one of the really interesting things that I saw while I was there is the government, when it focuses, can get a lot of really important missions done. And if you just establish the bold vision, people can align behind that. And at the time, this is kind of dating ourselves, but at the time, it wasn't sure if BlackBerries, iPhones, or Android devices would win. And so, we kind of bet on all three. And so we actually had a very early mobile app for a BlackBerry operating system.
Oh,
and,
wow.
so you are dating yourself a little bit, but we did bet on mobile. And we bet early and we bet big that mobile would be how the world experiences kind of visiting and remembering their loved ones, and kind of brought the team around it. And I think that bet paid off and was very, very early. Another thing we bet really importantly on is data. So we bet on kind of the customer experience with mobile, but we also really ensured the data was there, right? The last thing you want is some type of commemorative experience where the family member or the service member or the public lose trust. And a lot of what we were focused on was restoring trust and restoring honor,
Mm.
because there was a kind of public scandal at the time where we were using paper records and 3x5 cards. And I kind of inherited that as I stood up the CIO office. And so we spent a lot of time getting data really right. And I think if you fast forward today, with the generative AI explosion in the industry, right? Data is kind of what is powering these machine learning models that might improve customer experiences again. And so if I were making bets now, I would be thinking about how am I introducing that type of new technology into, future commemorative experiences.
Yeah, tell me a little bit, like zooming out a little bit to Arlington, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to the nation? And and like what is the scale that you had to deal with all those years ago? Like to have that forward thinking about, like it just must have been such a tremendous effort.
So it's a big team effort first. And I should just say, I speak on behalf of Nick Miller, not the Army, not AWS, right? Not the advisory committee that I'm a member of there.
Mm,
But for me personally, it was both awe-inspiring and daunting at the same time, right?
mhm,
Um, every time I pulled into the cemetery, I had a tinge of pride that our nation dedicated this paramount land in the center of our capital to remembering the service of people who served and gave their lives, right? And in the, height of the Iraq War and the height of the Afghan surge, like it was very real and very raw. And yet every day, like clockwork, the administration showed up to commemorate those who had served and greet visitors who were coming in. And so just tremendous pride thinking about that mission that the cemetery does to help people in their most their biggest time of need, and really kind of celebrate the lives of those who have served their nation, whether they um, you know had their life cut short or whether they lived a fulsome life. And just awesome mission and responsibility. The daunting side for me was just, I remember very early in my time at the cemetery. So we had paper records, and we had antiquated email systems. And we had a lot of families who wanted to understand, is my loved one okay? And I remember very vividly a Gold Star mother kind of calling in and asking, and like it gave you shivers just thinking about what you were having to respond to as an Army officer on behalf of the Army. And the daunting part was, okay, we were going to have to fix this. And it was 625 acres. It was 300,000 head sites. There were millions of paper records, and we were trying to have to organize it. But it was always grounded in how do we serve the family members who, want to know that their loved one is well taken care of. And so just tremendous pride in the work our team did, tremendous pride that this national shrine, if you will, is there in the center of DC to kind of create the human element. And very proud of how we thought about technology kind of enhancing the customer experience even then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, as I hear you talking, what I hear is your own personal experience and your own service kind of coming through, and that real purpose and meaning behind it all. And so amongst all this chaos, like you said, like 6 million records and this stuff, what it was, one of the most important thing was kind of coming back to the why we do this. And no matter how surmountable the task seemed, it seems that was the grounding piece that you and your team would kind of center yourself on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, every part of the operation. And like I said, I kind of went kicking and screaming into the Army, but the Army leadership development pipeline is there for a reason, and I think it's phenomenal. And one of the parts of the soldier creed, or different creeds, is we'll never leave a fallen comrade, right? And as you think about that commitment as an Army, you know this is the place you honor your fallen comrades. And if you're not doing that well, then there's this kind of mental dichotomy: is are you leaving them, right? And so like just instilling that from like my cadet training, my early officer time, all the way through my time at the cemetery, in the back of your mind was like, one of the most sacred missions of the Army is to never leave a fallen comrade. And this is kind of a place where we execute that very vividly and serve and dedicate that commitment to service.
Yeah. You know, when I hear you talking about that, I certainly hear the passion come through. I'm just kind of curious from kind of a commemorative place. When you think of someone visiting Arlington or maybe another place within in your country, what is it that you hope they get going into there?
Yeah, so I think, we thought a lot about the customer or the visitor experience, right? And there are, maybe just in any kind of product design type world where you try to bring product design to technology, there are personas and there's user stories and there's case studies, right? And so sometimes people were coming for a very specific person. They were coming to visit their mom, their dad, their uncle, their aunt, their friend, right? And their user experience was, I want to be able to get to that gravesite. And I talk a lot about some of the calls we had come in. We would record or transcribe the calls, and one of them was, I spent the entire time looking for my loved one's gravesite, and I had to get back because I had to catch a flight and I couldn't find it. But when
Mm,
you look at the human element of that experience, when they were there for the funeral, it could have been 10 or 20 years ago. The trees are much bigger. The grave sites have kind of surrounded it. Maybe trees fell down, right? And so the remembrance of that time, the situation has changed. And so, um, you know, how do you make sure they can do that simple use case and task, right? Because it pulled at your heart to hear them with that story, right? Um, but then there are people who are coming to the cemetery, from overseas or from, smaller towns across the nation. And, you know, this may be their first time and they may have no connection to the military. And so then the question is, how do you connect them to that great story of the service and sacrifice our military has done? One of the experiences I had when I was at the cemetery is we buried the last World War I survivor. He
mm,
2010, I think, 2011, we buried,
wow.
and he was 110 years old, right? And so, like, what a life. But how do you connect people to those stories? And, he got buried right by General Pershing, who was, General of the Armies in World War One and in the area where many of the World War One survivors were buried. But, um, you know, how do you tell that story of the history of what the men and women who supported World War One or World War Two or Vietnam did, and kind of connect them to the service of the military? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I think it's really important to think about that, right? And then there are, you know, historians or children, and as the Army looks at, maybe growing the future force, how do you inspire that next generation of service through enablement, education, learning? And you hear a lot in the industry about personalized learning. What does that look like in the commemoration space now, right? And how do we use new emerging tools to kind of get towards more personalized learning experiences in the future? And so we had big and bold visions to kind of go down those roads while I was there, and it's just awesome to see the foundation to kind of allow you to propel this industry forward and kind of tell that story, because I think it's a really powerful and great story of the service our nation has done to the globe and especially this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And and on that, like you were so forward thinking, and kind of as we look to the future with technology and commemoration, what do you think is the big challenge that we have to overcome?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would go back to data. Like, step one is going to be around data, right? Because if you're going to commemorate, you have to organize around people and location, and so data's super important. And a lot of these cemeteries are older, and they have maybe paper records or early access databases or Excel spreadsheets, and so you got to organize that data, and you got to think about how to kind of put that data in an environment. I think now you're really trying to get to, you know, if you can't visit, how do you visit virtually and make that as real as possible? You hear people investing billions of dollars in things called the metaverse, right? So I'm not saying every cemetery is going to have a metaverse, but maybe the more prominent ones, or how do you experience that? What does that look like? I think kind of organizing content around this, right? There's millions of digital content being created from veterans, as they're in service, videos overseas in Afghanistan, photos. How do you start to organize that content around the data, right?
Hmm.
And we talked a little bit in prep for the podcast around, will we start to see personalized LLMs, or
Mm,
use LLMs or large language models to organize the data, right? And so I think you're really just getting started, and you know, the ability to create unique experiences is really taking off. When we talk about in my personal work, when my company talks about work, we really say that generative AI will transform virtually every customer experience.
yeah.
And I believe that to my core, right? Like that it will change every customer experience, and it'll enable new. Just today I was using it, and I see bright things ahead as we think about how to apply it to this space and organize data, develop custom experiences, and help people better connect to the service and sacrifice of their militaries.
Yeah, and these are like Arlington, it's a big operation. Um, you've established such a standard in your data going from paper to digital and that transformation. What were some unintended, pluses from that? Like, did it help with operations? Did it help, the work of like not just visitors, but also for, groundskeepers, for folks that were horticulturists, for tree pruning? Like were there some pluses that you saw there?
Yeah, it's a small memory, but one of my more poignant memories is we had about a 40-year worker at the cemetery, and he had the typewriter on his desk, and he was the one who would update the records with the typewriter. And this was 2010, right? And so you know,
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm born, got my first cell phone in college, got my first iPhone after I came back from Iraq, and so iPhones at this point were three or 4 years out, so not a
Yeah.
long time, but still you've been using them. And the day we launched the cemetery geospatial system to kind of expose the cemetery in a spatial way to workflows, like uh, you know, he was talking like, I don't need this typewriter anymore. And, there was like a tinge of, I'm very sad because I like the job that I was doing, but there was also a tinge of huge pride that he
Mm.
was, you know, at a place where he could leave the cemetery as he thought about retirement and know it was in great hands. And so, yeah, I mean, it will
Uh,
transform every customer experience, and that includes the horticulturist. So like, after I left, I believe they launched a tree tour, right? And so you want to look at
mm,
memorial trees. Maybe the 3rd Infantry Division generate or donated a tree, or there's a plaque, or and so um, headstones. Like one of the things we did is build workflows around taking photos of the headstones, and they even used that data to then inspect the headstone coming in, and they saw like, hey, we have to talk about QA/QC on the headstones arriving because while there may be issues out in the field, we're actually catching more of them on the dock. And so,
mm,
mm,
I think if you get back to kind of running businesses digitally, running any operations digitally, that is the future. We have to, let go of these industrial age practices and kind of
mhm.
migrate to kind of these digital always on practices, because that's the experience that people have at home, and that's the experience they're expecting from those who are serving them now.
When it comes down to visiting Arlington, I had the honor of visiting, um, I guess over 10 years ago now. I ran the DC Marine Corps Marathon, which was an incredible experience. I mean, you think you're going through it, and then the person next to you is missing a limb. You have just like no idea. And I visited Arlington the next day. Sorry, I'm getting choked up. I could not, I think, have visited, in that chain of events with I don't know, greater reverence, I think. And I wish I had known that your app was there. I wish I had, either the app or Nick Miller with me. Nick, when you're touring someone through Arlington, are there any unexplored places or kind of hidden places that you'd like to take folks?
We talked about this a little bit, but um, over in section one is where William Chrisman was buried. And so you think about the history of the cemetery.
Mm,
Um, you know, uh, the quartermaster general had a little bit of a tiff with the commander of the Confederates, and wanted to kind of make the land uninhabitable. And they started burying people right outside the Rose Garden, right? But as more and more folks came in, they buried them down the hill closer to the Iwo Jima Memorial, and that is where the first burial was before they put the officers around the Rose Garden, right on the properties of the Lee Mansion. I always love looking at things like most people will go to uh, the you know the Tomb of the Unknown and the Old Guard, kind of guarding watch on the Tomb of the Old Known. But I love going back into some of the sections by old Fort Myers, and there's so much great story around how the Post Cemetery got kind of assumed into Arlington Cemetery, and they were qualified to be in the Post Cemetery, and so um, and then obviously, walking through Section 60 as somebody who, and for those who may not be aware, Section 60 is largely the section that was opened at the start of the, War on Terror and the Iraqi War and the Afghanistan War. And so it was an active section. And over time, that's where most of the active duty killed in action were buried. And so kind of going there and kind of seeing the commemoration there. But I also love going to Section 30 and 34 and so I would drive around quite a bit. Typically, it's just a big cemetery, so when you're going there, walking can put a lot of miles on it. And so, most people have a very short time. I'll give you an anecdote though of kind of the power. Just recently, I went to West Point. My dad went to West Point. My mom was born at West Point, and my grandparents are buried there. And I posted on a social media application that was West Point, and a colleague reached out to me and said, "My loved one is buried there. Can you maybe grab a current photo?" And I sent them a link to the extension of Arlington's app called ANC Explorer that was then kind of repurposed for West Point Cemetery. And she was like, "I'm with my mom and we're crying." And so back to kind of getting choked up and emotional, like what a powerful story within a matter of minutes to kind of serve a friend and a colleague that I work with. And then two, I didn't know where her loved one was buried, but because everything was spatially aware, I was able to actually find the exact space on the earth where it was very easily. And I would never have been able to do that without technology, right? And so this is how technology can enhance the experience. And took a photo, sent it back to her, and it's just a great anecdote of how technology can enhance that. And so haven't been to Arlington this year, but I'll probably get back there shortly, and always love to learn, right?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I know we're running a little short on time, though. I do want to just ask, and there's this aspect of commemoration, and we're looking at the sacrifice of these individuals who gave that ultimate sacrifice of their lives. There's a piece of, I think these spaces are healing for families, but also soldiers who served and returned, because there's a large bit of sacrifice for those individuals. And whether that's a physical wound or a psychological wound, these spaces, I think, can be a space for healing in a sense by, just witnessing and knowing that people will remember. Matthew and I are going to be going to the Invictus Games this weekend, and that's another space for healing. I'm just kind of curious on your perspective on that, and those who served and have come back, or if you had any thoughts in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the time when we were in Arlington, there was a question around what is the right amount of commemoration in a cemetery. Because, at some point there were Christmas tree lights hanging there, and because it was maybe too raw, right? But there's been long traditions of placing rocks on headstones or coins on headstones, right? To signify to others that gravesite is cared for, right? And maybe there's other trends that, but I think it's important to allow people space to grieve. And in my own personal world, right? Like having deployed, having seen peers, having seen colleagues not come back, it's hard to express that emotion and get that out. And so, just in my own time, I do think time at Arlington was healing for me in that way, to give back and give more than, and so I think it's really important. But I do think it also can be an always on type thing that doesn't have to be a physical space, right? So I'd love to see kind of where the technology is going. I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're in this new generation of technology, and that future is, like you've already said, that generative. And how do we do that? I think some of the questions that is going to come along with that is, how do we do it right? How do
Yeah.
we do it, ethically? How do we make sure it's the most accurate information? How do, and stuff comes up to mind all the time is, how do we make sure we don't put words into mouths that weren't actually their words? And yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think right now, across at least the United States, there's a big push towards kind of um, using technology to become more efficient, and really kind of using commercial technologies to become more efficient. I go back to, start with the data, right? Source artifacts, right? Is this something they said? Are they on video? And you can, look at how videos can be recreated and, spoofed and things like that. But you know, I do think you know, there will be enough first party artifacts that will allow you. I mean, if you look at it, while the content is maybe more in volume, this challenge is not new. We had that challenge, even in the past, right? Like, how did you tell stories about what somebody said from, the 1900s, right? And yet quotes have kind of persisted, right? And so it's maybe a little harder here, but I think, um, we always looked at how do we kind of be that voice of authoritative truth. Um, but I think what you can also do is allow for spaces where maybe there is more of a collaborative approach in kind of determining what that authoritative truth is, kind of the way Wiki does, while serving up the core elements that are authoritative to the operations of a national cemetery, right? And allow for both to exist.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Nick, I'd listen, Matthew and I could probably talk to you for hours here. We're only scratching the surface of this really, amazing, amazing topic around commemoration, how technology intersects that, and what that future looks like. And I mean, you've been on that leading edge from really the beginning, and are clearly consistently looking at that moving forward. I really appreciate your insights here today. Is there anything you'd like to share before we leave, or anything you think people should look at when it comes to connecting with Arlington or other places?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of kind of connecting, right? Like but my general sense is you know, you get out of it what you put into it, and I would encourage you to explore it, encourage you to visit the different websites out there. I think a lot more about how to kind of connect more broadly across governments, and how to use technology to connect across governments and kind of serve. And in terms of connecting with Arlington, I think they're great at the means they have, and reaching people through multiple channels, right? And I think that's kind of a very human approach as well. So, no, I just appreciate you shining a little bit of light on work that we did a long time ago, and very proud of it. And I appreciate what you're trying to do to drive the industry and kind of the discipline forward for the next generation. Because I think a lot of what I see in kind of the work you all have is looking at how to do this, in a more modern way that's now relevant for this day and age. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Nick. And, we'll do our best to make sure we keep that heart front and center, like you clearly did, 10 years ago when you were pushing a lot of this stuff out. So thank you so much again. For our listeners who tuned in with us today, please make sure to like and share this podcast. Thank you so much again, Nick, for your time. And Matthew,
We'll see you again.
we'll see you again.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Nick.
all.